Learning, who knew? Lorenzo, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks very much, Jim. Morning, everybody, and welcome back. Happy New Year. I've spoken to some of you individually, but not as a group. So I'll try and talk very loud and stand here so that everybody can hear. We'll come back to what's been playing on the board as you've entered later. So just welcome. So I want to start, to go straight into it, I want to start by just asking you to have a think about what you think improves outcomes of all pupils in a school. It's a bit of a rhetorical question because I'm going to sort of tell you what the research says and you can see whether you agree with it or not. Teaching practices leads to pupil outcomes. You can't have one without the other, so you can't really go straight to that end. And obviously that will influence the learning culture of the pupils as well. And my job and jobs of teacher educators like me is across the country and across the world is to engage in teacher education in order to try to get to that point. But we have this knowing doing gap, which I've spoken about before. You've seen this slide before. It's well documented that you get your teacher education, you do your reading, you do your research, and it makes so much sense and you want to do it. And then teaching is just so hard and you get into the classroom or you try it for a couple of weeks and that's sort of where it finishes. And that's just because of how difficult it is to do the job of a teacher. It is one of the most difficult jobs that you can actually do. So having a look at everything that I've managed to get my hands on about how to improve pupil outcomes for all pupils, these things come up again and again and again. So alignment, affiliation, and amplification. And obviously you can think of the opposites of all of those three words, which happen if we're not pulling in the same way. This came out literally a couple of months ago. It was an American study, tens of thousands of schools, and they looked at schools where when the pupils started, the average pupil was behind. And then X number of years later, they looked at it again, so it was a longitudinal study, and they honed in on the schools where those pupils actually caught up. And it was only 5% of the schools they looked at, only 5% of these, I think it was something like 30,000 schools. And only 5% did those pupils catch up. And that was equivalent to, instead of 1 year of learning every year, that was equivalent to 1.3 years of learning every year, which is why they caught up. This is a quote from the report. And I love this. They called them trajectory changing schools. How amazing to be a trajectory changing school. I mean, they were talking about this in terms of maybe disadvantage, but also in terms of learning needs. Across the board, whatever reason a pupil might not start school in line with their peers. So a trajectory changing schools minimize variation amongst classrooms. And there was consistency reinforced by school-wide structures, structured collaboration between teachers, and feedback that was focused, which is having like whole school focuses. And then the title of the report was called The Opportunity Makers. Love that as well. So that was an American study. This is a again, both of these within the last couple of months. This is a British study, about 100, they started off with about 300 schools, but through the process of their criteria, they ended up with about 150. These were state, these were independent, these were grammar, across the board. And students attending schools where classroom observation is undertaken by fellow teachers, peer observation we're talking about here, tended to achieve greater progress in attainment relative to peers. And obviously we know Hattie's visible learning. Those of you that have done a PGC recently or even relatively recently will be familiar with his impact scale. Some people have issues with it. Yeah, in the field it's slightly lower, but collective teacher efficacy is literally right over there, 1.6. Effect size, massive effect size. In the field, in the classroom, an effect size of about 0.16 is about extra 3 months progress. So you can think what an effect size of 1.6 would be. That's 10 times more. So how can we improve pupil outcomes? This is from the same study I showed you before. Research in the field indicates that if a school focuses only on strategies for improving pupil performance, student performance, that they will consistently be ineffective. So we've got to focus on teaching practices. It's just what we've got to do. Because students who attend schools where there is a greater emphasis on the quality of teaching, teaching techniques, strategies, structure of lessons, focused support, greater progression in attainment relative to peers. So, you know, I can't do a T&L INSET without a Dylan William quote. He's just so pragmatic. He's amazing. So we've got to commit. we've got to all commit to go, yeah, we just keep going all the time. We're never, ever going to get to that pinnacle. This isn't a career where we're going to get to the pinnacle. We're always going to be working on it. And the best teachers accept they need to get better. It's just what we're all accepting. And this is Arc Sloan, who released a video recently about their culture of constant improvement and peer collaboration. And this is a quote from that video. Just tiny, tiny tweaks. Not all at once. We're talking cumulative. It's a bit like an evolution, but we'll get there. So, together we are Clifton. That's our sort of overall arching motto, isn't it? These are our values. I know the pre-prep and the prep school have already got and sort of interpretations of those. I think they sort of marry up quite nicely. We've got kindness, curiosity, and courage in the pre-prep. We've got be kind, aim high, be brave in the prep. And just me thinking about it from a T&L perspective, I can't vouch of this is not policy or anything yet, or it may not even be, but I was just thinking, well, if I was thinking teaching and learning upper school, how would I do that? I would sort of think this, and I would put respectful under supportive as well, engaged and brave. And I introduced these to you. I think we can all agree that this is what, regardless of who we're teaching and what age they are, this is what we all want for the pupils in our care to all be safe, to all be thriving socially and pedagogically and developmentally all the time. So, together we are Clifton, but together we are also professionals. And I love these definitions of a profession. Now, you're not going to have time to read all of it, but maybe at a later date. There are two definitions of what a profession actually is. And the yellow bits talk about the core knowledge and the core skills. That is part of the definition of a profession, that all professionals in that same profession have the same core knowledge and the same core skills. That's why it's a profession. And then the green bits, though, are the fact that if you're a professional, you've got to exercise those knowledge and that skills in non-routine situations. So you've got to be able to be adaptive and responsive, and you've got to be able to have that autonomy and that sort of able to be really kind of nuanced. And that is the real sort of challenge. So we've got this sort of balance. We've got this foundation and this bit that ties us all together. And then we've also got this amazing professional autonomy and this challenging environment. So I got an iPad for Christmas. I haven't had one for 4 years. It's refurbished, but I don't care. So I've finally been able to do some of my artwork, I suppose. So this is kind of what I was thinking in my mind. You know, we've got a shared foundation, but we build our own castle. Okay, so you imagine you're building your own castle when you're in your classroom, but we have a shared foundation. We have to, because everything we know about successful schools tells us that we have to. So we need to be aligned in some things, but we need to have autonomy in others. What do we need to be aligned in? We've got to have the same foundation. So think about when you're building a castle, you've got to have a foundation. That foundation is the goals, the values, the principles that we stand by, which I've kind of touched on at the moment. But also it's the evidence base of our profession. And those two things are the evidence base of our profession, how children learn and how children develop. So that's what we need to share. We also need to share strategies, classroom strategies. These are just tools. This is just a toolkit. You can do different things with the tools, but you have to have the same tools. So an example of a strategy or a tool would be a questioning strategy, and we should all be calling them the same things. Materials. These would be the elements of a lesson. So we are looking at sort of the start of a lesson. That's an element of a lesson. An effective explanation. That's an element of a lesson. So we are going to be building and looking at these. But again, we've got to be building with the same materials. And we've got to be using the same language. If you are a carpenter, you know what a dovetail joint is. And if you're asked to use a dovetail joint, you do a dovetail joint, and it serves a purpose. Might be an aesthetic purpose, might be a structural purpose, but it doesn't mean you have to make the same piece of furniture. But it does mean you have to use the same joint, because it serves a purpose. But we're all different. So we've got to be free. We do have different contexts. We do have different experience. We've got different personalities and different approaches. And then we should celebrate that, whilst having all of this shared alignment as well, if we want to be a trajectory-changing school. Why? Well, I've given you some whys already. I'll just give you a few more whys. Because learning must not be a lottery. So it might be that some pupils love a certain maverick technique. But actually, we know what we know about the best of what we know about how pupils learn and how pupils develop, that for the majority of pupils, there are certain strategies that work. So learning must not be a lottery, but also for teachers. Teaching must not be unteachable. Teaching must not be unlearnable. If you're an ECT that comes into this school, you don't want to be told to go and watch so-and-so because they're an excellent person to manage behaviour, and you come out of their lesson, you have absolutely, the pupils behaved immaculately, but you've got no idea why. Because that person, some teachers just do have that sort of gift. But that doesn't mean that's the only way to be a good teacher, and that's the minority. So you can't really learn from a maverick, but you can learn from a goose. Teachers must be able to collaborate as well. I hope I've convinced you of this now, that if we want to be improving pupil outcomes, we've got to collaborate. And you can't collaborate if you're talking different languages, using different strategies, using different tools, and having different understandings. So this is why it's so important. It's the teachers who follow and promote the systems that make the school, and we should venerate that because it's so important, because it allows that trainee to walk into any classroom and come away with exactly knowing, oh, I was going into that classroom because I wanted to know about strategies for whole class response. And I could see them because we know we call it the same thing, and we know what the strategies are. Another Teacher Development Trust recent article, another study suggests that one of the only 5 key aspects of teachers' working conditions is that most closely associated with improved student attainment is the ability to collaborate, or the opportunity to collaborate. So we've got to break down teaching practices into components. We're not trying to teach you to teach by numbers. We're trying to establish that firm knowledge base and that firm materials and tools base. So breaking it down, we've already started. We've got 5. These would be strategies. These would be 5 tools. Now, they're not all going to be from walkthroughs. I haven't bought walkthroughs, hook, line, and sinker. That we are adapting and we are developing our own. And there are some that I think, actually, no, I'd like to change that a little bit. But we've got 5 strategies already. Questioning strategies over here and behaviour strategies here. We've also got a material, 1 lesson element that we've already looked at, and we're going to do some more this term. So I have been working on a practice development framework, and this is a developmental tool. This is not a QA tool. So this is to be used by teachers for self-reflection. And I think I'm going to find this really useful. And so there are 3 stages, and I've been sort of trying to put myself, which stage am I at for all of these tools and strategies already? Am I exploring? Am I establishing, or am I maintaining? And I've written descriptors for each level, which they'll just be consistent. And then for each time we're working on a particular strategy or a particular element, then I've written some classroom indicators for that particular element for each level. So if you go into the classroom of a teacher who is establishing, and actually these are in your booklet on page 11 to 12, you will see the descriptors and so these are got the descriptor on the board as well, but I haven't put the indicators on the board. So, for example, if I am exploring one of these things, then I'm adapting it for my own context. I'm trying out different iterations. It may not look the same each time. I'm not used to it. My pupils are not used to it. I'm having to spend quite a lot of time planning it. And maybe I'm not reaping those pedagogical or developmental benefits yet because I'm exploring. And I should say, you should only be a blue in 1 at any one time. Please don't try to explore more than 1 in a term. It's not possible. So only 1. Establishing. I know what works best. I'm now widening it. I'm putting it into more lessons. I'm doing it more frequently. Most of the time, my pupils are responding really consistently. And everybody's being more familiar. And I'm starting to get those pedagogical or developmental benefits. And then if I'm maintaining, it's become habitual. Rarely have to do anything. That is very consistent. I'm reaping those benefits in bucket loads, and I'm thinking about actively planning to evaluate the efficacy and the impact and seeing whether I need to do another cycle. So that's the bit about alignment, autonomy, why we have to have this shared bit. So now I'm just moving on to this term and this term's focus. So this is like the second half now. So first half, me hoping to convince you of why we're doing this, and now this term. So last term, we looked at this problem of this lost learning time because it's one of our key goals as teachers. And I showed you this quote that on average for every 30 minutes, 7 minutes were lost. That's not the only thing that takes up time. Probably the other major thing that takes up time and that takes time off of what we call productive time. So there are 3 categories that time in school is sort of, what's it called? Put into, I suppose, that's the wrong word. But 1 is allocated time, 2 is engaged time, and 3 is productive time. So engaged and productive time are actually a bit different, but they can be disengaged, and that would be just allocated, but not engaged and not productive. So beginning lessons, that's the other major problem. And this, again, okay, this report is not current, but they looked at quite a lot of schools and they came, and quite a lot of lessons, and they came to this figure. I couldn't, at the last minute, I couldn't find out the length of a session in the pre-prep guide, so I couldn't do the maths for your bit. I wasn't quite sure how long it was, so I didn't want to guess. But I've done the maths, and this is what it equates to per lesson. If we add both things together, behaviour and beginning, and I know there might be some overlap, the behaviour might be at the beginning, etc., but actually, we're still losing a lot of time. So, AI did this. Apologies for the UPT. I did ask it to remove the UPT, but then it gave me something completely that I didn't want, and I couldn't get this one back. So, you all familiar with the starter task? We want really to move more towards the do now, because starters have a bit of a history that maybe is a little bit dodgy. A lot of teachers are doing starters brilliantly, but a lot of teachers would have had training on starters that was perhaps not ideal. So the starter was traditionally seen as the engaging bits of the lesson where you've got to grab their attention and you've got to make it fun and you've got to make it, engaging, and you've got to be an entertainer and you've got to be a clown and you've got to be exhausted, and it's not actually serving a pedagogical or a developmental purpose. We don't want that. We don't want teachers to be entertainers. We want teachers to be educators. So the starter, bit shallow, bit entertaining, bit kind of, is the do now. And if you call it the starter, it doesn't matter, but it's the mentality behind it that matters. But the do now is more powerful. The do now is exactly what it says. Do now. Do something purposeful and meaningful for your pedagogy or development now. Not later, not in a minute, now. So I'm not going to show you the mental model of learning because you've seen it about 100 times from me, but this is my tiny nod to it. The do now looks at that child's brain developing. The do now should take into consideration what they have experienced and what they already know and how it links to what they're learning. So it is purposeful activity for all pupils immediately. Last term, a lot of you, I know, worked on starting your lessons. I did as well. And I asked a few of you to give your pupils a survey, if you wanted to, and you did. And we got 214 responses, and I collated them, and I did some analysis on them, and the pupils are really insightful. The y-axis is the number of times that people mentioned this particular benefit. We didn't tell them these benefits. We didn't prime them for these benefits. We just said, how do you think, how do your lessons start, and what benefits do you think there are, and do you have anything else to say? And out of that whole questionnaire, there were only 2 negative responses, and the rest were all positive. And this is what they said. Obviously, the biggest mention is getting their brain ready to learn and helping them to focus. But we've got other big ones like better preparation for the current lesson, improved recall, improved memory, effective review of last lesson, etc., ongoing revision. The 2 that I really want to bring up are these 2, because these are a massive point of a do now, is so that the teacher can assess pupil knowledge and so that the pupils can reflect on their own knowledge. But they did say it, which is nice. So also asked some teachers, and we can't read through all of this now, but I know PE in the upper school have done a massive collaborative effort on this, and they are seeing a lot of benefits now with that, particularly with their behaviour management. They're seeing that as well, but also with the pupils' exam technique. We've got some other ones giving that great instant feedback so that you get that responsive teaching. I know that MFL have been doing a lot of work on it as well and standardising the format so the pupils know what to expect. And yeah, I won't read them all now, but I'll share this with you later and you can go through them. So getting lessons started is not something that we're now moving off of because we're not there yet. I actually would class myself in the maintaining stage. But after seeing my pupil feedback, and I had 2 hunches before that, So I had two hunches. Then I got my pupil feedback and I was like, yeah, they mentioned the two things that I thought. One, I think they're a bit long. And two, I think they're a bit samey. Not to say that there needs to be a massive variety, but I was thinking. And so I'm going to work on that. So I might go back into some reiteration with mine. So let's define what we mean by this. So a strong start includes planning beforehand. Then it includes what happens when the pupils travel, wait, and you prepare immediately before, when they enter and you greet them, how they engage with the activity, and how you deal with the contingencies and the logistics that crop up during that time, and whether you're able to circulate and assess. Then potentially feedback, and this is obviously if you were doing it for a pedagogical purpose, but if it was a developmental purpose in EYFS, then you might not be doing this bit, which is why I've grayed it out. And then, again, providing lesson overview and context. But the bit in the blue box is basically the lesson start. This is what we're talking about. You're going to have a collaborative session after I've spoken. During that collaborative session, hopefully you'll be able to identify these shared principles by looking at scenarios from all three stages, EYFS, primary and secondary, all teachers, and looking at the strengths and weaknesses of those. And then pairing up with a teacher in your discussion group. There are pages in your booklet to write down who your pair partner is and trying to do those peer, I'm going to call them peer pop-ins. Peer pop-ins followed by learning for conversations, because that, again, going back to what I presented at the very beginning, that is crucial for us to be a trajectory changing school. You know, we may not have the most disadvantaged pupils, but we have pupils who start behind and don't catch up. And they deserve for us to help them catch up. And then after break, you'll be doing your departmental or stage discussion, or age stage discussion, and hopefully you'll be appraising your starts at the moment and reflecting, and then hopefully co-planning some strong starts together. And again, you may not be co-planning starts that are exactly the same for every teacher in your department, but you will be co-planning them based on a shared format, structure, principles. There may be some departments that feel they are at maintaining. If you feel you're at maintaining as a department, then I think it would be really exciting for you to plan a project to assess the impact of what you've done so far, or to explore the next bit, which is how do you signpost them? How do you show them where they are on the map of their development or learning? And how do you tell them what they're going to do that lesson? So you've got this mind map. It's overwhelming when you look at it all at once, which is why it's not going to appear all at once. So I have collaborated with one of my best friends from uni, who is now assistant head for early years in Garden International School in Kuala Lumpur. And I've been back and forwards with her a lot over the holidays, trying to come up with something that is relevant to every teacher, regardless of the pupils that you teach, give or take. So this is going to appear. It is on pages 9 and 10, but it'll be much less overwhelming if you follow it as it appears. So what is a strong start? It is a defined segment of the lesson. You don't go straight in. There is a segment that's the start. It's usually 5 to 10 minutes. And prior to this, the pupils would have been with another teacher or caregiver or in another space. So that's what it is. It must have a purpose. And that purpose must be for pupils and for the teacher. And the purpose for the pupils must be pedagogical and or developmental. So you've got to have a purpose in mind. It's kind of what you start with. So, and the teacher, the purpose for the teacher is they must be available. That is physically available and mentally available. So whatever you plan needs to have minimal teacher input, which is why this all hangs together. And then if that's the case, you'll be able to be very informed and do that circulation and observation and all of that kind of stuff, which is what we really want. So developmental purposes, these are the three prime areas in EYFS. So physical, personal, social, emotional, communication, and language. So a combination of these, but this will be a developmental purpose. If it's communication and language, it might be supporting independence or practicing key vocabulary and language. If it's personal, social, and emotional, it might be fostering positive social interactions or enabling self or co-regulation, some control of emotions. If it's physical, it might be sensory explanation of fine and gross motor skill practice. Pedagogical purposes then should be to establish the relevant cognitive framework for that lesson, note the word relevant, to establish an optimal learning environment, or to aid self-regulated learning and wider goals. So Aiding self-regulated learning and wider goals would be ongoing revision and consolidation, strategy or skill training and practice, maybe like exam practice or triangulating homework. Optimal learning environment, settling and calming, setting the tone, re-establishing your expectations. Cognitive framework involves of either preview or review. So you're priming or you're activating relevant prior knowledge to get that connection solid. So those are the pupil purposes. The teacher purposes, the teacher must be available to deal with logistics and contingencies. And therefore they'll be able to be informed also, they'll be free to be informed by what the pupils can do now, what the pupils know now, and how well the pupils are engaging. So that's the purpose. Every start must have a purpose. And then we'll be able to circulate, live mark, observe, feedback. So that's all grayed out now. How do we do this? Well, we need to maximize the ratio and we need to minimize the time lost. So we maximize the ratio of how many pupils are participating, how many pupils are thinking hard about what you want them to think hard about, and how many pupils are progressing. That's the ratio, as high as possible. And pupils think by engaging with the material and by reflecting on what they already can do or do know. And then if you're thinking about your do now, how is this going to be happening? Well, it's best if it's tangible. These are best. If it's not working for you and but these are the best ways to achieve that. If it's a tangible activity with an output, it's far more likely to get a high ratio. If it is accessible, which means it's a simple format with visual permanent instructions and it's only dealing with what they already know or can do, then you're going to be able to be free to circulate. If it's predictable, consistent, maybe not exactly the same, but consistent, so they're not like what's going on when I walk into the room. And individual, I've put a star by that because again, that's just to say if you're struggling to get everybody involved, a group discussion might not be the best starter. Again, we have autonomy though, so you're able to assess whether it's working or not, and you're able to review it. Time. Strong Start's got to maximize time, so it has to be ready. And in order for it to be ready, it's got to be planned, resourced, and set up. And when I mean resourced, I might just mean a pen and the question in your head. Okay? I don't mean loads and loads of worksheets, but you need to know what it's going to be. Immediate, they start as soon as they come in, no lost learning time, and hopefully that's better. So these are the really important bits. They can go wrong. They can have challenges. There are lots of challenges, and there can be lethal mutations. Introducing a new activity every week, you're unlikely to be able to hit all those goals. Would it be easy for a student to just do it without really putting much effort in? Then it won't be achieving your ratio of thought goal. This was one I did ages ago. I gave the kids this one. I thought so hard about it. I spent ages selecting these images. They came in. I hadn't taught them anaerobic respiration yet. And I went, look at these 3 pictures and have a think and a write down about what the connection is between the 3. They spent 5 minutes. They were really engaged. It was not productive at all because when I went through it, they were like, well, I think there might be food poisoning and maybe she's drunk and hungover. And I'm like, oh my goodness, no, I want you to get the link that it was anaerobic. So again, a little tweak to that would have been, I could have put the 3 pictures, write down what the connection is with anaerobic respiration, write down everything you know about it, but that wasn't productive. There's a Spielberg-esque one here that you can look at later with like music and shooting and bombings and everything as they come in. Again, they loved it. It was fun. Did they remember anything? This one is more about making coffee and tea and having a chat for far too long. And this one is busy tricking. Busy tricking is at the end of the starter, the pupil had done this, but when the pupil had done this when the teacher actually looked. But when the time had ended, that's what they did. And they wrote all of that during the teacher's feedback. And they were busy tricking during the starter. I'm going to write the date. I'm going to underline it. I'm going to write the question. I'm going to highlight it. Busy tricking. They look busy, but they're tricking. So how do we make these changes? Well, hopefully we can engage with the evidence. We can plan intentionally and collaborate with each other. We can teach our students these routines. We can explain the rationale. Tell them why we're doing it. Tell them why it's so important. So that's my presentation. I have sent you a quick form, but actually, let's not do it now. Let's go straight to our groups because otherwise we're just going to, the collaboration is really, really important. There's loads of, these are all the sources that I have read and engaged with in order to put this presentation together. please do take the time if you've got to look at them. And all your group lists are at every exit. You've got leaders. Thank you very much. Oh, and if you want to be instructionally coached this term, please see me or Helen or send us an email, because we're looking for new people to be one-to-one instructional coached. Thank you. Bye.